There's two different versions. So notice that there's two different versions. There's the initial, which is for initially identifying a student as an English learner. This usually happens when students first enroll in kindergarten or those older TK students. And then you will follow the assessment questions, and it's a bit shorter, and it allows for some different scoring in order to determine whether a student is an English learner or not. Often our students at that age do end up being identified with a less than a 4 in order to identify them as an English learner, given their limited experience with English, and they become identified as an English learner. Although there are times, going back to the initial, there are times that students join us in the middle of the year, or they join us from another country in the middle of the year. So initial can be given at any time of the year. But once the student's identified as an English learner, they take the yearly summative assessment, which happens in the spring. We're going to be using, again, this ELAA assessment from anywhere between February 1st and May 31st. It's our annual assessment, and we use the same 4 levels as LPAC. So there can be have well-developed English, moderately developed, somewhat developed, or minimally developed. And then as the students this giving the summative assessment allows you to determine whether a student may continue to be an English learner, or if they do score at that well-developed level, whether they're a good candidate for reclassification. And for these kids, you would need to use an alternative reclassification process, because the typical reclassification process is only for students who take the LPAC. But so these kids are taking an alternate assessment, you would need to use this alternative reclassification process. The good part that you'll find is important for especially at a time like this, where our data, we gather as much data as we can, but the data is sometimes not as easy to gather as when we're in person, is that this is a multiple measures approach. So you may be in person and gather some of this data and be observing some of this, but if you're also doing some of this remotely, you'll find that there's a lot of flexibility in how you answer these questions. In the end, you're going to be making a determination based on different tools, whether that's observation, whether that's probing, sitting down with a student, whether that's interviewing. You'll be talking to different people in order to score this. You'll be working with at least a minimum of 1 other person, if not speaking with others. And you'll be gathering information from different contexts. So you'll be knowing that your scores don't just come from a single snapshot of a student, but over time and different locations and different settings. And another important thing is that this data can be collected over the previous 30 days. So if you have some performance data, some portfolio assessments, or some writing or reading or speaking, listening data, you can use that in order to make your determinations. And you'll be listing all these measures you use on a final summary sheet. That it's a score sheet that will allow you to determine the proper level of this student, and allows teams to determine the appropriateness of English learner supports and services. So the assessment items can be based on the student's experiences. Another important part of this, because experiences are different now for students, given our different types of instruction. And so you can base it on that type of experience, base it on what type of, what their lived experiences are now. All questions are delivered orally in English, because it's an English assessment. However, we'll talk about them being able to respond often to you in eye gaze or through augmentative communication in whatever way they're showing you that they understand those English prompts. So like a lot of our special ed assessments, things start with observational data, us not starting with just probing, but what have you noticed in your instruction? If you notice that a student's not reading sentences, then that's not something that you're going to probe for in this assessment. So you start with your observational data. You know the students, you know what they're capable of doing. That'll help allow you to more specifically probe for certain questions, and not have to put students in front of questions that you know that they won't be able to understand. You'll also be able to observe their understanding of language and use that data as well. You can look at your recent performance data, as I mentioned, over the last 30 days and use that. That this student, this is you're collecting data based on how well you know the student. So that's why the case manager is usually takes the lead on this assessment because they know the students the best. But we're also talking about using other perspectives. Who else is talking to that student in English? Who else knows how much they can listen and speak and read and write in those languages in English? So that's important to, to rely on those that know the student the best. And the same, using whatever supports the students need in their instruction as part of it's already in their IEP. So knowing that we don't assess students for areas that we haven't already supported them in. So our assessment should look like our instruction. And knowing that we're probing over tolerable sessions. They can take breaks. This could be over time, it could be throughout different sessions. They can respond to your English prompts by matching, by pointing, by eye gaze, using their communication device or whatever mode of communication they're using. You can change words throughout the probe. So if you see something that asks for them to indicate different types of clothing in the assessment, you can change what the clothing objects are. We're trying to remember what the actual assessment is assessing for, following directions, being able to answer yes or no questions. These are things that can be used with different questions that are familiar to the students, different objects, different words that are familiar to them. That we try not to use intrusive prompts that's going to change the way that they're going to answer. For example, changing your intonation or giving or things that aren't part of their normal environment. So we list, and then we list any of those variations that we use or adaptations as needed. So it's a very flexible assessment. It's that you're able to just if you did need to use larger fonts or whatever adaptations or variations you made, you're and knowing your student, just make sure that those are indicated on the summary sheet. So the next person that's looking at this data, in order to determine the level of need, will be able to look and know what type of variations and supports they had. So you can repeat these items if necessary, allow wait time if you're going to be probing. So we talked about starting with observational data, then looking at other data that you already have, portfolio data, data from your sessions with students, your instruction. But if you are probing because you don't have all the data you need, then use these type of supports as well. Repeating of wait time, whatever that is that 5 seconds, which is some students need. Or not waiting because you know that you don't expect an answer. So giving breaks, using neutral voice without overemphasizing to give too many clues. And of course, what doesn't need to be said, giving them positive reinforcement for their effort.